I'm sure this guy's it's Pilate. I'm gonna call him Pilate.
Pilate.
Love me some Pilates.
I love me a hottie that does Pilates.
Hotties, Pilates, Kalani's.
Doing squatties.
Not going to address the colonic.
Kalani's?
There's an old Simpsons episode where Homer was getting a bunch of coupons, or he got a coupon book as a gift or something, and he thought a colonic was a pina colada. So he had a coupon for a colonic, and he's singing pina colonics, getting caught in the rain, as Lisa's trying to tell him, Dad, that's not what you think it is.
I don't know what it is. What is a colonic?
It's when you flush your colon out with saline solution, I think.
Oh, okay.
Some sort of fluid, but they put a tube up your bum, and then they flush you out.
Ah.
So Homer thought he was getting a nice, refreshing beverage. I assume it is probably refreshing to get all flushed out. I wouldn't want to go through the experience so much, but, well, they probably dope you up real good, so you probably don't even know what's happening, which is also kind of a scary thought.
You get a good high, and then you just get anally probed.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound terrible. I think I would give it a try.
Might be what getting abducted by aliens is like.
Yeah, probably. That's probably people have probably gone through that procedure, and then that's what they think getting abducted by aliens was. They're so sure, but it's such a traumatic experience. They have to wipe out all memory of ever doing it.
Yeah. They're like overly masculine types that can't cope with the fact that something went up their butt.
Yeah.
Might be the best cold open we ever get, and we're one episode in, so that's pretty good.
So, on to the Bible.
On to the Bible.
Anal probing onto the Bible.
Excellent segue. I think we should probably, since we didn't start this way, just kind of go over what the point is of the Bible talk, generally speaking. And that's that my belief is that the Bible isn't meant to be taken as a literal piece of historical text that is documenting the life of this guy Jesus that lived 2,000 years ago. I think it is a series of stories and allegories that are meant to be analyzed and have a lesson taken away from them. Yep. That's basically where the premise for the Bible discussion came from, is just looking at the Bible that way and then doing a little bit of analysis of those stories.
Yep.
And I personally became extremely disillusioned with Christianity and religion in general, because growing up and going to Catholic school for a couple of years, it's really hammered in that, like, no, this is real. This happened. All of this happened. There was really a horrible flood way back in the day that Noah saved a bunch of animals with using a giant wooden ark. People used to live to be 900 years old, and they would have children the entire time, all the way up to ripe old age of 875. And Jesus was actually a guy who walked on water and performed miracles. Mm-hmm. I don't think that anybody wanted us to think that, at least not the people that originally put the text together and had this idea of the religion originally. I think that it has been bastardized into that through generations of just A, intentional bastardization, and B, misinterpretation of the Bible specifically.
Yep.
And then
I guess the short version of my origin story would be, it was in high school. I had been strong, really, really strong. Well, strong isn't even probably the right word. Fanatical believer in Jesus, probably up until 8th grade or high school or whatever. But for a background in high school, I had this teacher named Charlie Beach, and he was incredible, and he was a world religions teacher. And he would bring in Jewish people, and he would bring in Muslims, and he would bring in Buddhists, Hindus of all sorts, Mormons, right? And I don't even know if this was his intention, but I started to have these people come in, and people were kind of giggling at what they believed, and they're like poking, like all the students are like, haha, you guys really believe this, that aliens came down? I thought, well, if I grew up being told to believe this my whole life, I would believe these things also. So how can I sit here and believe that because I was taught and told to believe in Christianity that this is the right religion, that this is the one that I'm supposed to believe? And that kind of started the unraveling of my origin story around becoming agnostic, and saying, well, I don't, like, if these are all different religions and there's a few different universal truths in each of these religions, why is mine the right one? Why is Christianity the right one? Like, that doesn't make sense. And then once I started critically thinking about it, you could even say that I took up that cross of, bringing a new perspective into my life and deciding what to do with it. Do I choose to suffer through that a little bit and like, well, fuck, if none of these are really meant to be what people are saying they're meant to be, there might not be an end to this world. There might not be a heaven. That's fucking terrifying when you first start to think that. And so then I was in the desert for 40 days, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. And then coming out of that, I'm kind of at the point now where we're talking about, this is an interpretation, just like you said. These are metaphors and parables meant to give us a guiding way to live a life.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I had a similar, I guess conflict when I was probably even younger than middle school, where I was just like, well, why is this the right one?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many other ones. How do we know that we're right? So I can absolutely relate to that. Definitely. All right. So first topic I wanted to go over was the crucifixion and how that relates to the idea that life is suffering, which I think is a widely accepted idea across several different religions. Non-religions. I think Buddhism might even acknowledge that
life
fact,
is suffering.
Which is really just a belief system. You don't worship anybody. Like, you're not supposed to worship Buddha. You're just supposed to follow his example.
Right.
But yeah, I think that just the idea of intentionally accepting something extremely terrible, like going through a crucifixion, just as you are being ridiculed by all of the people around you, picking up a cross and just bearing it and carrying it up the hill because it is what it is and it needed to be done. I think that relates to, just the idea that it's important in life to accept that tragedy is a thing that everybody is going to experience and go through, and you're going to suffer, even regardless of the circumstances. There's no avoiding the death of a loved one or the unexpected passing of a friend, or losing your job or a business, for whatever reason, like you didn't do anything wrong, but your business just tanked.
Yeah, there's not a single human that's ever existed that has not suffered, at least in some capacity.
Yeah, and if there was, they probably wouldn't be a very interesting person to interact with, because they just, I personally don't think I would get anything out of being around somebody that is just constantly optimistic to the point that they are incapable of seeing the potential for bad.
Naive.
Bordering on it is naivete.
Yeah.
Which so I think that ultimately that story is just trying to teach you that at a certain point you are going to have to just pick something that means enough to you to make that suffering worthwhile. You have to find something that occupies you and stimulates you significantly, psychologically or physically or both, just to make that suffering worth it, because you can't get away from it. And it might be less important for certain people that are maybe extremely optimistic to find something like that. They may just unintentionally find that. They might not have to go on that journey. But for somebody that's, say, like high neuroticism and prone to depression and anxiety or bits of rage, anything like that, you have to find something that will get you through your bouts of horrible negative emotion. Thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think it's multi-layered. I think that what you said, like precisely, just to a T. No, nothing. I have no differences in any.
Definitely, there's
thought.
more to it than that. I don't think that that's all that there is to take away from that. I think there's a lot more to be taken away from that. I just think that specifically the idea of picking up your cross and carrying it up the fucking hill so that you can be crucified anyway is symbolic of the idea that you need to accept the fact that you are going to accept travesty and find some mode of existence that is going to make that worthwhile.
Yes. And I think in the theme of like what we initially kind of came up with the Bible, of like how the Bible has been interpreted so many times, and it's certainly been misinterpreted. At the same time, you know, these principles that you see in the Bible, you're going to find, I think, in the Quran, you're going to find in the Torah, whatever it may be. You think of Sisyphus in the Greek mythology, his cross is pushing that boulder up indefinitely up the hill, right? Life is suffering. That's just another example of, I think you can find universal truths in these religious texts, and you don't have to stick to one.
Yeah, definitely.
When I look at the crucifixion, so when I was growing up, went to Catholic school in grade school, grew up Catholic all my life, and didn't start questioning until really high school. But the thing that I was always curious about is like, well, how is Jesus dying on the cross taking away the sins of our, like, so he just died on the cross, and because of that our sins are taken away? Like, what's going on here?
What's the connection?
Yeah, what's the connection? But to add a layer to what you were talking about, in order for us to transcend, Jesus dies and then he rises again 3 days later, right? In order for us to transcend ourselves, if we have our two selves, we have ourself, and then we have the ego self, right?
Yeah.
A part of that ego self has to actually die. You have to sacrifice a part of yourself in order to grow. Yeah. If you find out that you are a narcissist, or you find out that you are a psychopath, or sociopath, whatever it is, one of these negative traits, if you figure that out about yourself,
or even something less serious than that, if you've realized that you are phoning it in at work and you are just not being the best that you can be, or you are fucking around being willfully unemployed or working a bullshit job that isn't paying the bills, is never going to pay any bills, doesn't allow you to save any money, like if you're just fucking around.
A part, so you recognize those things, and then now you have the option to either choose to do something about it or continue on the path you're on. If you choose to do something about it, a part of you have to sacrifice a part of yourself. You have to be crucified. Yeah. You have to die, essentially. A part of you has to die and rise again, and you have to go through that, and you have to transcend yourself. And then, like, a lot of talk in the Bible is about Moses determining, or foreshadowing Jesus, right? Well, after Moses saves the people from Israel, or from the tyrannical leader, whatever, Egyptians, right? Yeah. Egyptians, they're in the desert for 40 days. And when I look at that, I think, okay, that's you're in the desert. It's not great. It's hard. This is you figuring out that new part of yourself. You've just killed off a part of yourself, and now this is that time period where you're figuring out, how do I live with this new identity? Yeah,
it's like you're wandering around the wasteland of who the hell am I now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. And in that time period, it will inevitably be difficult to figure out who you are now, who you need to be now. If you've been operating a certain way for a long time, it's not easy to wire your brain in such a way that you are operating differently. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to adopt new habits. I mean, a lot of people say that, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like, if you can stick to something for 6 weeks, it'll become a habit. Like, no, definitely not. Like, you can absolutely fall off hardcore after 6 weeks, or if it's not 6 weeks and it's like 3 months. Even, like, no, for a significant change to take place within you as who you are as a being, you need to invest a significant amount of time. That is not 6 weeks. That's not 3 months. That's probably not even a whole fucking year.
Yeah. And you have to change your identity. You have to identify as a new person. Like, if you're a person that smokes cigarettes, just because you stopped smoking for 66 days doesn't mean, to your point, doesn't mean you're going to be able to quit smoking cigarettes. Like a part of your identity has to become a non-smoker.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I quit smoking for 8 months and then got back to smoking at one point, you know, and I've since quit for, I think it's been almost 7 years now, but, yeah, no, it's absolutely easy to fall off if you don't dedicate yourself to maintaining this new persona that you have adopted. And you really, during that time period where you are kind of stupidly wandering around trying to figure out what the hell you do now, you might have to be kind of critical on yourself. You're probably going to have to be pretty critical on yourself, especially if it's taken you a while to figure out what the hell to do and you're really still just wasting time. Like, you might need to almost verbally abuse yourself a little bit. And don't think of it as actually being abusive to you, because you are trying to become a new person, to your point. Think of it as abusing this old piece of shit that you are trying to turn into a relic of the past who no longer exists. And you might have to be very critical with yourself like that. Like, if you are, like I said earlier, like just wasting time, fucking around, not being productive, not building yourself, not building a skill or improving upon yourself in some way, that's a serious problem. And you need to be your own, like, father or drill sergeant or God in a way, like by ascribing to the higher moral compass that is in you, as opposed to the lower moral compass that you're following when you're actively being a worthless waste of oxygen. It's a big problem, and you do really need to daddy up on yourself and be the one that says, like, get your act together now, get your shit together. What the fuck are you doing? Go be better now, right now.
Yeah. Oh, completely. I think, and then to add on to your point, I think we've talked about this in the past of, you know, what is original sin, and I always heard Jesus dying on the cross takes away original sin, not just sin, but original sin. That is like how we've talked about the sins of our fathers, the sins of the past, the sins of the fact that we have this evil that's in all of us, our capacity for evil.
Yeah.
And in transcending yourself and taking on that new identity, in bearing that cross, that is you making up for the original sins of your fathers, of the capacity to cause harm.
Yeah, I think that the general idea of that is accepting the fact that all of the evil that has been done in the world at any point was done by people. And so that, like you said, that capacity for evil is a part of all of our genetic makeup. It was a bunch of normal people that orchestrated the Holocaust or any genocide in history. And so accepting or dying on the cross for that original sin, I think, is symbolic of the idea that you need to recognize the fact that you do have the capacity to be genuinely awful, and you need to make it a point to not act on that capacity or impulse if it comes up. And maybe dying on the cross is, in a way, allowing that possibility to just die. And you are dying on the cross is symbolic of you recognizing the fact that that is a part of you, and right then and there committing to never allowing that to be a part of who you are ever again.
Living by adhering to strict principles.
Exactly.
And the cool thing, like, I love the Bible because you can keep figuring different things out, like, just by talking it out.
Yeah.
In believing, let's say, that you're so unique that you don't have the capacity for evil, you've just created a false god out of yourself.
Yeah.
You're starting to worship a false idol in yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that idea. Yeah, because if you think that you're the one special person in the world that just has no capacity to do wrong, what the hell makes you think that you're that special? You think that you are a deity at that point.
Right.
You can do no wrong. Yeah, no, that I like that idea.
Yeah, that's cool. Huh. Yeah, I totally.
Wonder if so. I have the story of the crucifixion actually pulled up.
Sweet.
And I think I'm wondering if maybe specific bits within that story might also be open to further interpretation. Great. So what do you think we do here? We think we do bullet points, read whole Bible chapters?
I think podcast is long-form, nuanced discussion. I think reading a whole Bible verse or chapter is fair.
All right.
Okay, so we're not actually going to do that because it was like 10 minutes of reading and it wasn't that fun. So instead, we're going to go through an abridged version of the crucifixion now. First of all, Judas agrees to betray Jesus. The Bible doesn't make it 100% clear why he does this. One motive is definitely money. He takes 30 silver in exchange for the betrayal. Other possible motives are influence from the devil, as well as Judas becoming disillusioned with Jesus' message and kind of thinking that it's actually doing more harm than good. Then we have the Last Supper, where Jesus foresees and foretells Judas's betrayal, as well as Peter's denial of Jesus' allegiance, which Peter and Judas both vehemently deny. Jesus is then arrested, sentenced to death, and taunted/assaulted and spit on by the crowd in attendance at the sentencing. Peter then denies Jesus 3 times, the first 2 times to the same woman, and the third time to a group of people, wherein he is especially enthusiastic about that denial. After this, Judas realizes the error of his ways, and he tries to give the money back to the government, I guess you would call them. And the government is basically like, no, we're not going to take the money back. It's dirty money. It's for blood. So away with you. Get out of our face. And Judas feels so bad about what he's done that he goes away and he hangs himself. After Judas hangs himself, Jesus is brought before the governor, Pilate. Pilate's wife says that she has suffered in her dreams because of Jesus over the last day or the last couple of days. Then Pilate asks the crowd what he should do with Jesus, and they all say, crucify him. So Pilate literally washes his hands and says, my hands are clean of his blood. You all made the decision, so go away and do what you will with him. I don't care. After that, Jesus is flogged and adorned with the crown of thorns, after which the soldiers who beat and crowned him mock him some more. They give him a staff and a robe and everything, and then after they're done mocking him, they take the staff away, take his robe off him, and then hit him with the stick a couple of times. Then a man named Simon is forced to carry the cross for Jesus for a while, which isn't really elaborated on much in the book. The crucifixion is talked about in several different books within the Bible, like Matthew, Luke, and I think one more, maybe even more than that, but I'm not sure. But either way, they don't really elaborate on the whole Simon situation. Then Jesus is actually crucified next to 2 rebels. Once Jesus is up on the cross, a soldier mocks him again. Then when I think Jesus asks for a drink. So the soldier soaks a sponge in vinegar, puts it on the end of a stick, and puts it in Jesus' mouth, and then Jesus drinks the vinegar. One of the rebels being crucified next to Jesus then mocks him a little bit and basically says, if you're the Son of God, why don't you save yourself and all of us? The other rebel, on the other hand, basically says, you and I actually deserve to be up here, other rebel. This guy Jesus hasn't done anything wrong. And then he asks Jesus to remember him when Jesus goes to heaven, to which Jesus replies, truly I tell you, today you will be in paradise. So agrees to bring the guy to heaven. Then, after Jesus had been up on the cross for a while, darkness fell upon the land, and Jesus cried out, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And then he dies. When he dies, the temple is torn in 2, an earthquake happens, tombs are split open, and holy people rise from the dead. And whenever Jesus is raised from the dead 3 days later, these raised holy people actually go into the holy city as well and are seen by many people. Once Jesus dies, the earthquake happens, the temple splits, and catastrophe is broken out across the land. The soldiers realize what they've done and that he actually was the Son of God. Then Jesus' body is taken down and buried in a sealed tomb. And they seal the tomb so that Jesus' followers can't come take him from the tomb, even though he's still dead, and say, look, after 3 days, he rose from the dead. So they were just making sure that no shenanigans happened there. And then 3 days later, he obviously does rise from the dead.
So that is the story of the crucifixion.
The two things that stuck out to me, one is the Iya Yama Sabachthani, or however you pronounce it, but my God, why have you forsaken me? Whenever I've like asked about that in the past, it just kind of got glossed over, and I'll come back to that one. The thing that initially stood out to me was, and this is pure speculation, and it's not based and founded on literally anything, but Pontius Pilate's wife saying, have nothing to do with that man. He has come to me in many of my nightmares. Is that Pontius Pilate's wife, I believe, that said that?
Yeah.
Like, what stands out to me, and like I said, not founded in anything, but it's like almost as if Jesus is haunting her, as if like the calling to do good is haunting us almost. That call is there, and you're looking at it and going, I don't think I want to touch that. It's too difficult.
Yeah. I could definitely see that. And that her suffering, even in her sleep and her dreams, about this terrible thing that is about to be done, the killing of an embodiment of ultimate good, essentially. She is so put off by actually addressing doing the right thing as opposed to rejecting evil that she is struggling with it in her sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
In the subconscious. Yeah. Even at what we would normally think at a conscious level, it's when we are denying ourselves of being better, it's going to seep into our subconscious.
Yeah. No, I like that as well.
Anything stand out to you?
Yeah. The fact that Judas rejected the money, threw it back to the people that gave it to him, and then went and hanged himself.
Yeah.
Over, again, betraying this embodiment of ultimate good, for betraying what he knew was right and doing something that he knew at the time was wrong, and eventually came to the ultimate realization and accepted the fact that it was wrong and that he could not live with himself for what he had done. I'm not sure specifically how the hanging of himself, maybe the idea that betraying that idea of ultimate good in such a profound way is paramount to just ending the possibility of you living to your highest potential. Like, if you completely reject and condemn that idea of ultimate good, you are in turn condemning yourself to a life of ultimate evil, or, just non-life, not a life worth living, at least. And I think that death could be symbolic of that in the Bible, as opposed to saying Judas went off and lived a very unfulfilling life,
right,
and was very sad about what he had done.
Right. The thing I always struggle with the Bible is does every word have a meaning to it? Or are there some parts that are filler and some parts that, that's where I really struggle with the Bible.
Yeah, like, how much are we meant to draw from every little detail?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Judas is an interesting one, if I recall correctly, and I could be not, but he was Jesus's like strongest apostle of the 12 apostles, in the sense of like the most for Jesus and for the message, and he was totally about
most supportive.
Most supportive. Yeah, I don't know. I think that would be a good one to come back to, of like Judas, a whole episode dedicated to Judas.
Yeah, I think, investigating Judas.
Yeah, because I know at one point during the Last Supper, Jesus says, one of you will betray me, knowing that it's Judas. Like, what the hell does that mean? That's...
Yeah, no, that would be interesting to get more into, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Should we transition into the story of Abraham and Isaac?
Yeah, you lead the charge on that one.
Cool. So, I'll give you a brief context, but everyone kind of knows that is interested in this kind of stuff. Abraham, quite a big question that a lot of people have for religious types and Christians is, well, what the fuck? God would just ask this dad to sacrifice his son? Like, what the fuck? He sounds like a piece of shit God. Like, who asks someone to do that?
Old Testament God's a little bit more brutal than
Yeah,
New Testament God.
He's vindictive and fucking dark and sadistic.
Yeah, almost a little bit sadistic a lot of the time.
Yeah, right.
Definitely. Yeah.
But you go, well, why would this guy sacrifice his son? And like, again, like for me at least, in my personal experience, I asked different Christians, and they never had like an explanation for it. It's like, oh, we should be willing to sacrifice everything for God. Like that's what we should be taking away. This God, this sky daddy, this guy in the sky. This is who we should just be willing to sacrifice everything for him. And I'm like, well, I don't think that's what that is. And so when we've been talking about this, and what I started to kind of think about is, well, you think about a father, looking after their kids, right? And this could be the most moral, sound guy ever. But if something happens to where he needs to become evil, truly evil, to protect his children, it's likely that they'll become that. And I think the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac is, in order to be as, maybe not godlike, but as close to perfect as you can be, you would have to be willing to sacrifice your children to adhere to the principles, which I would consider God in this case. Replace the word God with principle, or with
your higher moral compass.
Higher moral compass.
Which, I think that's what God and Satan are meant to symbolize. Right. Is just your highest possible moral compass that you could be operating within, and then devil is the lower moral compass that you could be operating within.
Right.
Just being a good person and versus being a piece of shit.
Yep.
Like every time you do anything, you have a decision to make, even if it's just, am I going to do this thing or not do this thing? One option is better than the other. If you choose the better option, you're operating under that high moral compass. And if you choose the worse option, you are operating within that lower moral compass. Mm-hmm. And I think that, just to evolve on Jesus a little bit, that he's meant to symbolize somebody that is living completely under that higher moral compass and aligning himself with God. So Father, Son, and then Holy Spirit.
Spirit's a tough one.
Holy Spirit's a tough one. My idea on that is that that's the idea of unity that we can achieve between each other if several people are operating strictly by that higher moral compass.
I like that.
But the Holy Spirit's a hard one to nail down. It's like Father is God, Son is Jesus, so that's high moral compass, and then Holy Spirit's just kind of a guest character.
Side.
We still have to figure that one out.
Side character.
Yeah,
definitely. And so, I think you have to be willing to sacrifice like what the most dear to you in order to be willing to, or in order to getting to that principle, in order to being godlike.
Yeah.
So
and I think that I would probably agree with that.
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one. That's why it's taken me a second. My immediate interpretation of it is somewhat akin to your interpretation, the original interpretation that you said of like being able to sacrifice anything for God, but taking it a little bit further and removing the word God and turning it into, you have to be willing to sacrifice even that which is most dear to you, which would most hopefully be a son if you have one. I do think that in a way it is meant to symbolize being willing to sacrifice literally anything that is even the most precious to you in order to operate under that moral compass. If that moral compass is telling you that something needs to go, it might need to go.
Yeah.
And maybe at the last second you realize that that thing doesn't need to go. I don't know if you need to analyze the story that deeply whenever God eventually says, like, no, don't actually do it. Maybe the interpretation ends at, you need to be willing to sacrifice that which is most dear to you in order to operate under a higher moral compass, because that thing might not be as great as you think it is. But that interpretation kind of leaves me wanting more.
Yeah, me as well. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's one worth mulling over a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's have you seen the pictures of like every cross reference that's in the Bible, and it's all of these lines going, so a Bible verse from the Old Testament crossing over to the New Testament, and the New Testament crossing over to another part of the Old Testament, and it's all these lines. I'll pull it up.
Yeah, I think you've shown that to me before. Yeah.
That's why this is so difficult to break down, right?
Yeah, it's almost like you have to be familiar with the entire book in order to properly analyze it. And I found that as I was reading through the Crucifixion chapter, now I'm thinking that was almost not even worth the time, because as I'm reading through it, I'm like, I'm missing context here.
Yeah, right.
Right,
so, exactly.
No, definitely. Yeah, just how connected every story is, and how connected that story would then be to so many others. So just so many of the different stories are interconnected with each other that you really do need to have a good grasp on a good amount of the material in order to properly have a grasp on any individual piece of the material. Which makes it very difficult to analyze.
Yeah, the intersection is interesting, and it's like, is every single different Bible verse or story meant to be its own unique lesson, or like are there copies of lessons within there? If so, why? If so, why would they copy lessons other than just leaving the lesson as it is?
Maybe some of them really need to be hammered home.
Ones that we continue no matter how much we reflect or read, like we're going to need that hammered home to us. Yeah,
it might just be a point of emphasis. I mean, just thinking of a real life connection, working as a nutritionist, a lot of people just don't want to track their food.
Right.
And so I don't know what they're eating. Some people just really need it hammered in, like, I need you to do this if you want me to be able to help you. Some people don't need that, but some people do need it, and it seems like it's really basic and doesn't really need to be repeated to a lot of people, but some people just don't get it.
But yeah.
So maybe that's the reason, if there are repeated lessons in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the Bible's fucking tricky.
It is. Yeah.
I don't know. You have anything else?
No, I think given the small amount of preparation, we've got a good amount of Bible talk to work with. I don't have anything else in mind.
Cool.
The little card game might be fun real quick.
Oh, you want to play it? Did you have
do a couple card polls? Saw that whenever we came in, made me think of it. That'd be a fun sign-off.
Next time, or as soon as I can, I'll get all the walls covered in these, move the table back so that we're in frame a little bit more, and it'll be a more professional setup next time.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll do any full readings in the future. We will have...
Get the highlights.
We'll have Spark Notes prepared.
Yes. Yes.
Might chop that down in post.
Cool. Yeah, and depending on how much access we have to AI, it'd be cool to, like, while going through the Spark Notes of them, putting up images of, if you see those like YouTube shorts of, like, the Joe Rogan, maybe like the part 5 of 5, you ever see those Joe Rogan shorts where the guy's telling a really intense story and then they're putting up like a AI generation of a leopard that was about to eat the guy, and then I'm botching the description of this.
No, I'm understanding what you're saying. I haven't seen any that are using AI generated images. I mean, I've seen the format that you're talking about, just not with AI.
Yeah, so we could, depending on how easy that is, we could implement that. Do I have the box? Okay. To end it, this would be a fun way to end each one. White is sad, pink is romance, yellow is personal, green is intellectual, blue is controversial.
Okay, and remind me the rules of the game. It'll be helpful for the podcast anyway, but I genuinely forget.
Yeah, so pull a card, you'll read it, and the point of these cards is it's called Asshole because it's trying to destroy social boundaries.
Love it.
And I'll read the directions. That's a nice social boundary you've got there. It would be a shame if something happened to it. Filled with inappropriate, deeply controversial, philosophical, and vulnerable inquiries, this deck of unusual questions will keep your night full of nervous laughter and your relationships somewhat distressing. So,
right.
Pull one, you read it out loud, and then we'll kind of give our answer to each.
Yeah, and radical honesty here. We talked about lie to me earlier. One of the employees at the office that this guy works at operates under what he calls radical honesty.
Oh, God.
Never lies. Ever. Full 100% honesty, no matter what the question. So I'm going to need this key reminder every time I pick, most likely. We'll start off with controversial. Okay, so in a world where different ethnicities had strong genetic differences which caused different moral behavior, would racism be okay or still not okay? That's a tough one, because if they genuinely can't help it and it was a genetic difference that just like made white people pieces of shit, like, is it okay for the rest of the world to just hate white people?
Right. Some would probably say, yeah, that actually exists already.
Well, yeah.
Some of the radicals.
Kind of where I was going.
Well, so when I think about it, like, okay, if it made all Asian people child molesters, like I might be taking this question too literally, like then yeah, it
just says different moral behavior. It is not specific. So yeah, I think depending on the degree of the immoral behavior, yes. Yeah. But I don't know if it would be racism at that point. So maybe not. I mean, if it's something that causes them to be child molesters, I think that might just be an extension of your hatred of child molesters.
Yeah.
It's not like, you don't hate the person. If it made all Asian people child molesters, I wouldn't hate this person just because they're Asian. I would hate him because he's a child molester.
Right.
So I guess my answer is no, because it would be more of an extension of my moral compass causing the hatred, not the actual race. Because there would still be outliers, most likely, right? I mean, we do have genetic differences between us, but there are outliers. Generally speaking, East Asian people are shorter than Europeans, but there are extremely tall Asian people that break that general genetic difference, right? So there would still be outliers, and I think that you could probably still avoid racism based on that fact, because there would most likely still be members of that race that didn't abide by the negative moral differences.
So, and where different ethnicities had strong genetic differences which caused different morals. So they're Are you interpreting that as 100% of them?
Yeah,
I would interpret that as 100%.
Okay, well, if we're assuming that it's 100% of the members of that race, then I will say, I guess racism would be justified in that case.
Yeah, I think if let's say I own a store and the Asian population, they had a genetic difference that caused them to steal. That's considered immoral behavior, right? So they steal. And so if I would not allow Asians into my store. Hopefully it's not clipped up out of context.
Which would be technically racist.
Yeah.
But if they literally had a genetic predisposition
to stealing,
100% to stealing, I think that it would be perfectly within reason to say, no, you cannot come into my store.
And I think I get a sense of why she prompted this question in particular. Oh boy. If you go to certain areas and you go to a certain store, there is a certain in certain areas there is a certain demographic that is causing more of the trouble. That does not, now to take this question away a little bit, There are exceptions, right? Of course, not every black person is going to steal from a store.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a genetic predisposition for those that do.
100%. That's worth clarifying.
Yeah.
I would still have racial biases towards those people coming into my store. Because we are, as humans, we're pattern recognizers. Like, we recognize patterns on how to survive and how to avoid danger, et cetera, et cetera. Racism is a form of pattern spotting.
Yeah.
It's not always justified. It's rarely is it justified, I should say. But if 5'2" Asian ladies are coming into my store and stealing all the time, if they're the main demographic that steals, I'm not going to be able to help but watch them when they're in my store.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not doing it because I want to dislike 5'2" Asian ladies. It's just how the human instinct works. Yeah. I'm going to recognize this pattern, and I'm going to be more concerned about it. Same, in high school, we had to write papers or whatever, and a prompt that I had was, if you're walking in the middle of a street and on one side of the sidewalk and the other side of the sidewalk, on the left side of the sidewalk is a black man in a 3-piece suit, and on the right side of the sidewalk is a white guy in baggy jeans and hood up. I'm going to go to the side of the black guy in the 3-piece suit.
Yeah, and actually, having lived in a shitty area for a significant amount of time and spending a good amount of time just kind of walking about the neighborhood, I felt equally sketched out by every person I walked past. For the most, that's where the outlier is just the occasional person that doesn't look sketchy. Yeah, and I can't think of any examples of any race. Right. Because you're living in an area where that is the demographic, is sketchy people, and for the most part it's just like everybody there, and it doesn't matter. I walked past plenty of white people, Vietnamese people, and black people that sketched me out, and it's just because, generally speaking, there is a culture between all of the people in these areas that is just, it seems a little bit off and sketchy if you're not from that area. That is very full of crime.
Definitely. Definitely. To hark back to my owning a store point, right? Let's say that the majority of crime that's in the area is black people. Just to hammer this home, because I really would like this to be hammered home. If a black guy in a 3-piece suit walks in, I'm not going to be watching him. Even though that the majority of, let's say, this crime in an area is black people, it's multifaceted. It's how you present yourself, all these other things.
Yeah, ultimately what it comes down to, if you are looking at crime demographics by race and you're looking at an area that is predominantly occupied by any specific race, they're probably going to be committing the majority of the crime. Mm-hmm. If I went over to Valley Park, where it's like 95% white people, they are committing the majority of the crime.
Yep.
And like you said, it wouldn't have any bearing on me looking at them and how they might act based on the fact that they're white. It's based on how they're carrying themselves.
How they present themselves.
How they present themselves.
How their demeanor. What do they want? Yeah.
Exactly.
All these things.
Yeah. And just like you said, if I owned a store and if I owned a store in that area in Valley Park where it's very heavily like white meth heads committing all of the crime, the majority of the people that sketched me out would be fucking white people, and it's because they would look like meth heads that do crime.
No.
So yeah, I think that's definitely a big difference from what that question poses, which is
Certainly.
An actual genetic predisposition that affects 100% of a populace of a race.
Yeah, that. I think we covered that. I would like to think we covered our bases on that quite well.
I think we covered that pretty thoroughly.
How about one more? Let's see. What do we have here? Shit. These could just be a podcast in themselves, just going through.
Yeah, seriously.
Let's do personal. Ugh. Which group is larger, people who trust you or people who you trust?
People who trust me, Probably. I don't know how many people trust me, but I'm not a very trusting person naturally. You have to earn it.
So the larger group is the
larger group would most likely be people who
trust you.
Me. Probably. Again, I don't know how many people trust me, but I'm not very, just trusting.
Yeah, I
naturally, at least, I'm capable of trusting people, but you have to show me that you are worthy of trust, right, because I've been bitten in the ass for giving that away a little bit too freely in the past. So
yeah, trust is earned. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna agree. Like, I can say with certainty that for the past, since my adulthood, since I've matured, since I there's not a person I've screwed over intentionally, ever. That's the only problem with these fucking things.
What's that?
Yeah, they turn off after 29 minutes. Because if they went longer, they would be labeled as camcorders, and then they would be taxed differently. And so I guess it's like a tax loophole to keep eye on, whatever. Now, another part of the trust is, like, can people trust me to, if a serious decision is to be made and it takes like a last second, like pulling someone out of a burning car, could people trust me?
Yeah, I guess there's different degrees of trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just different scenarios that come into question whenever trust is being discussed. You can be trusted to keep a secret, or you can be trusted to, like, defend somebody from a
right,
life and death attack scenario.
Right.
Those are two completely different things.
Yeah. I would say, like, more people could trust me to keep a secret than I could trust people to keep a secret. But I think there are more people in my life that I would trust to, like, save the family or something, or make a safety call, let's say. I think there would be more people that I would trust than that would trust me, which is like a kind of an insecurity.
As far as the safety goes specifically.
Yeah, as far as the safety goes specifically, which is kind of an insecurity of mine. Like, if there's a serious decision to be made in the moment, am I capable of making the right call under extreme pressure?
Do you have evidence of whether or not you can? Either way.
The only evidence I could have that I can just think of right now, I'm sure I do, but that I could think of is just the feeling that I have in those moments where, like, I'm uncertain and I'm, like, trying to push that off to someone else, trying to push the responsibility of something like that off to someone else. Well, maybe, for instance, like when we tripped mushrooms and went to Quick Trip, and that guy knocked out the homeless guy or whatever, and then they came in.
Little context, the homeless guy definitely deserved it. Definitely deserved it. The guy who knocked him out, so the homeless guy asked another man in the parking lot for a cigarette. And we're getting this from the guy that knocked him out. He's very excited.
He goes, I run the south side.
I run the south side. I just knocked out a bum in a gas station parking lot. I run the south side. Which, I mean, south side does have a low bar, so maybe he runs the south side. But the way he told it was the guy asked him for a cigarette. He gave him a cigarette, or was in the process of giving him a cigarette, and the guy tried to steal his pack of cigarettes. So he knocked him out. So he didn't just crack a hobo for no reason.
Yeah. And this was a few years ago, right?
Yeah, but go on.
But, well, in that, I was like, I'm just going to chill outside. And then that happened or whatever, and they were coming in. You're like, why don't you come inside? And then in that scenario, I wanted to pass the responsibility and the trust off to you for that.
Gotcha.
Now, granted, we were on mushrooms.
Yeah, that's reasonable considering wasn't that the first time that you actually tripped? Yeah, so, I mean, that's completely reasonable. At that point, I had been using mushrooms for several years. I was extremely familiar with them, and you were absolutely not. We are not just not in the house anymore, but we're not even in your neighborhood at that point. We were somewhere that neither of us were really that familiar with. I lived there for a year and a half, 2 years ish. That's that's enough time to get a good feel of a place, but it's not really like home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And assuming that we weren't assuming that we were completely sober, like, that's where I'm like, I want to be the type of person that could make the right call of like, well, why don't you come inside, or no, you're good out here. Like being able to make that judgment call. That's what I want to be able to be trusted by other people.
Yeah.
Would you prefer being trusted more by other people, or would you prefer trusting people? And to give that context, would you prefer having a circle of people that you could trust over having a circle of people that trust you?
That's a good question. I can't say that I really know what it's like to have a large circle, or even just a real circle of people that I can genuinely trust. You know, at this point, the amount of people that is not what I would consider a circle. You know, it's a handful. So I would say I don't have a problem specifically with not having a whole lot of people that I would say that I trust. And I don't know if I would want more people that I think I can trust for any particular reason. As far as the ability to protect goes, well, really, I guess that's probably true in any facet. Obviously, the amount of people that I trust for, like, if I was in a dangerous situation, who would I trust to be able to, like, help me defend us? You know, like that's a larger group of people than the amount of people that I would like confide in about psychological issues.
Yep.
I guess I would probably prefer to have a circle of people around me that feel like they can trust me, just because I like being capable.
Yeah.
And that would be evidence of the fact that I am, in fact, capable. Or rather, not evidence, because that makes it sound like it's kind of a reassurance thing. More just that you don't have that, generally speaking, unless you can be trusted. Obviously, there are manipulators that can gather circles of people that follow them. But as somebody that is not operating like that, if I had people around me that did trust me, I would know that it's because, I am genuinely capable of something. Like, this wouldn't have happened otherwise.
And to circle back,
so I guess a certain part of it is reassurance, which which, I mean, capability is can be judged by yourself, but it's good to get a second opinion on that kind of thing, because you might be blowing smoke up your own ass for all you know. It's good to get people that you trust and that genuinely give a shit about you to, you know, let you know whether or not you are on the right track.
Yeah.
You know, whenever I was working in person at the gym still, and one of the sales reps just mentioned to one of my managers, like, Rob has seemed so much more like comfortable and just like open lately, and I had been making an active attempt to feel that way, not just present that way. But
interesting.
Hearing somebody say, like, he looks like he is more comfortable in his own skin, is like, okay, so I'm not being delusional. I don't look like a weirdo. I am actually just more comfortable.
That's a super interesting delineation. Feeling it as opposed to just presenting yourself that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to circle back all the way around, and if you're the person that other people can trust, it means that you have bared enough crosses to be trustworthy.
Yeah, sure. People have observed the fact that you are, well, maybe not even that as well, but you have accepted enough responsibility that these people have placed their trust in you.
Right.
Those people, in a way, are partially your responsibility. Let's say you're not responsible for everybody that trusts you,
right?
But to a certain degree, you are. You're responsible to maintain that trust and not betray it.
If you're operating from a higher moral compass.
Yeah. Well, I would say generally speaking, you do have that responsibility, and actually accepting that responsibility would be operating. Under that higher moral compass. But I think regardless of how you are operating, you do have an obligation to not betray people's trust, and to do so would be to follow the devil, quote unquote.
Right. Sweet, cool. That's a good way to wrap it up.
I think so.
All right. Thanks, guys, and we'll be back for the next one whenever.
Definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Let's go in the other room where there's air conditioning.
Yeah, definitely. Let's kick this AC back on.